Biocharisma podcast. Here's your host, Christopher Gardner.
Good day, ladies and gents. Welcome to the Biocharisma podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Gardner. We have Itai Hauben on today. He is a regenerative agriculturist. I like to say permaculturist or permy, but he prefers the term regenerative agriculturist to describe his profession as just a person that's like Johnny Appleseed, having the capacity to go out there and essentially restore our food shed. This is a very big deal. It's a massive responsibility. As our populations grow on this planet, it's not just about growing food, it's about having quality inputs. Etai's journey is a remarkable one, coming from Israel all the way over to Central America, then up to California, and you'll get to hear his whole story about meeting his Colombian wife and their journey here. And I'm just happy to have him in my life, and I'm happy to share him with the podcast. If you guys like this whole side of life, the permaculture side of life, please check out my other podcast with Brendan McKeon of Eco Oasis and also of Jenny Smith of, I believe it's Community Carbon Trees, Costa Rica. All these individuals share one thing in common. They really are giving back. Their legacy is one of food and trees. And if you were to ever meet these people in person, you would fall in love with them as I have. So without further ado, enjoy the podcast. Welcome, Biocharisma family. We are here with Itai Hauben, the permaculture extraordinaire. How you doing, Itai?
I'm very well. How are you doing, Christopher?
I'm doing wonderful. Let's start at the beginning. Where are you working? Where are you living? And more importantly, I want to actually focus on your time here in Costa Rica.
Okay, so let's go from the present and then jump to the past. So in the present, I live in Los Angeles de Rivas, which is on the foothills of the Chirripó mountain. And I work not very far from there in a little town that's called Santa Elena del General Viejo. And I'm managing a project that is called RISE. And it's a project that's on a very large piece of land. It's over 300 hectares, and it's entailing all kinds of future developments. My part of the project is to manage the agricultural part and other land management related things. And for me, it's one of, or maybe the most exciting project I managed so far after many years of managing projects, because first because of the scale, which is just bringing it to a next level of permaculture, and the other part is the fact that me and my boss, or the development crew, are seeing very much eye to eye with my vision of how things should be, and it's been a tremendous pleasure to work with the rest of the crew. And we'll probably get more in detail further down this conversation about what's going on here. But
what exactly is your vision? That's a good question, is because I don't know if you remember, but one of the times that we were driving to the northern part of Costa Rica, you showed me one of your very first projects just outside of Jaco. And it couldn't have been more than, 2,000 square feet of project. Do you remember that? That little...
Yeah, the Green Hotel.
The Green Hotel. And now how many acres is the RISE project that you're working on?
800.
A slight difference, right?
Yeah. No, but before the Green Hotel in Jaco, that was a very small gig indeed. But I've been working on larger projects before. I've been developing the permaculture part of the Eco Village in San Mateo de Alajuela, and that is 17 hectares, 45 family ecological condominium. And I've been working in Pachamama community in Nicoya Peninsula. Before that, that is a very large community with very large land. It was baby steps introducing permaculture at that time there, but now it's well rooted. And as well as another project that I managed in Colombia that is called La Estrella, another ecological condominium and eco village. Yeah, where do you want to go next?
Well, it's kind of incredible to see how the different scales of the things that you've gotten into. I want to get into your design ethos. I want to get into, for those that don't know exactly what permaculture means and what your design ethos is within that realm of permaculture.
Okay, so just very briefly, what is permaculture is a design philosophy um, for a regenerative and permanent culture. The term was coined by two Tasmanian guys back in the 60s, Bill Moison and David Holmgren. They were Bill Moison was a teacher and David was his student of ecology, and they got very alarmed by a study that they read that is called "The Limits of Growth," published by the Club of Rome, that made a study of the trends of humanity and the ecosystem, and came up with a very, very thorough study of what's going to roll out, running multiple, huge amount of scenarios, and always coming to the same bottom line that growth in a limited resource planet is not possible forever. There is a limit to growth as capitalist economy sees it, and they that triggered them to start thinking in terms of how can we use the knowledge of ecosystems and apply it to humanly designed systems, because whether we want it or not, everything is a product of design, and it could be conscious or unconscious design, it could be good design or bad design, and the criteria in which you do the design by, in case that it's even conscious design, will determine if it's good or bad, because good for what, right? But if we look at the natural world and we look at the criteria that we can deduct from the natural world, then of what's good and bad, then we can come up with a system of principles and ethics that we can work with to create our own systems. The premise was, if we look at an agricultural system, let's say a field of corn, okay? We can expect only one crop from it, and it would require a very large amount of energy and intervention from us to make it into that monocrop of corn, right? The moment we stop investing energy into that system, it immediately moves away from being a field corn to something else. Probably first, a field of annual herbs, and then the succession kicks in and start developing. If we look at the natural ecosystem, let's say a forest, for an example, it requires no energy input, human energy input. Of course, it requires the sun, but it requires no labor, and it always will remain in this dynamic equilibrium of maintaining the same system, perpetuating the same ecosystem. So they say, well, a forest is so it requires no intervention, no human energy input, no labor, and it maintains itself. And plus, on top of that, it provides unique and crucial environmental services like maintaining the hydraulic cycle, providing biomass, cleaning up the air by photosynthesis, creating resources like food, medicine, lumber, etc., improving soil, all of these without any interference or without any input from humans. So they said, well, okay, so forest is just amazing. Why are we doing things differently? Why would we ever want to forever have to put labor, money, energy, time into systems that would never perpetuate themselves? Um, and they started designing agro ecosystems or ecosystems that are productive for humans, because not everything in the forest or a lot of what grows in the forest is not edible for humans, um, but for other animals. So we could just tweak it a little bit and create systems that produce crops for humans while they still provide all the ecological services and provide habitat for animals. And this is the line of thought that we're working with, and we keep pushing the edge of what's or increasing the edge, as we say in permaculture, of what's possible with that vision, with that concept.
That's such a beautiful thing. One thing, the saying that I love from permaculture, or the permies that I've been around, is the notion of stacking functions. Having the capacity of one thing doing multiple things. And
Right.
when I walk through the forest, I really get that sense that, you know, the mycelium in the ground is acting as a ground cover, but then it's also being a nutrient transport chain. It's a communicator between all the root systems. It's doing multiple functions. There is no mono anything in a healthy forest.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly.
so for me, like a lot of the devices and the things I create, I'm always trying to have it do more than one thing.
Uh-huh.
So it's just, I guess that's just a sign of health, wouldn't you say?
Well, I think when we talk about ecosystems and permaculture systems, the focus is on how many viable connections or interdependencies you have in the system. If a system has multiple components, but they have no viable interdependencies between them, then it's just a collection. It's like you go to a botanical garden and you have this huge diversity, but it requires a big crew of gardeners to maintain it all, because they don't self-maintain, since they don't have these specific interrelationships. What makes systems more stable and resilient is the fact that they have these adaptions to support that every member of the ecosystem or the guild or the system that we're creating in for agricultural purposes is both receives its needs from other components of the system, and that his outputs are being consumed or needed by some other integrant of the system. So, for example, a tree needs the droppings of a bird, and it provides the fruit that attracts the bird to sit on the branches and eat the fruit. So this is a very simple relationship. There's relationships in a mature forest tends to be extremely more complex. But just to give an example.
Well, it seems like in general, if you read any evolutionary biologist and anthropologist, it seems that most intelligent systems move towards complexity. How is it that the humans, as you see it, like in our short lifespan, what is it possible for there to be a human input that can give as much complexity to a system that nature would do by herself? Question that's better on point would be, with the amount of, I guess you would say, real disequilibrium that's occurred from human input since the industrial age, or we could even say since the agricultural age,
Yeah.
with the current permaculture systems that you've been working with, do you see a hope or a light at the end of the tunnel? Do you think we'll have the capacity to regenerate enough acreage where we are viable, where the interdependency?
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a very clear question, and that I can give a very clear answer. The
Okay.
answer is that it's not a problem of design or of our capacity to do so. It's a problem of politics and finance. That's the only thing that stands between us and moving into a fully regenerative agriculture. Um, eh, we know how to create food forests that create habitat for animals and provide food for humans. The net or the gross yield of these systems is higher in calories and in environmental services than any other agricultural system. And what stands between us and going big on that is mostly political reasons or cultural reasons and financial reasons.
Do you think the economies of scale that are involved with having 7.5 billion people on the planet, and the need to have the it's not even the fact that we can't produce the food, we can produce the food, but to produce good quality food is the question. Do you think it's just
Topher, you're pushing me to talk about some very unpopular things here.
Please. Go for it.
Well, the question of population growth is a very painful one because for one reason or another, we care for our kin. We put the value on human population survival or feeding the human population at a higher place than we put the survival of whales or lions or marine turtles. And what I ask myself lately, and I don't necessarily have an answer, and it's an ethical question, is let's say that we could feed a growing population of 7 billion going on 9 within a decade. Maybe we could, but would that be ethical? Would that be something that we actually want to do? Because once we figure out how to feed 9 billion, and maybe we can even do that regeneratively, I don't know the answer for that, but then we'll have to figure out how we are going to feed 20 billion.
Well, the way I look at it is this way. I think from my uneducated perspective, a lot of the problem isn't actually the population. It comes back to what you were originally saying with economics and politics. The big problem is greed, essentially. In the economic system, the quality inputs were traded for easy, convenient inputs, because right now in the materialist, pro-capitalist West, waste, the measure of an economy, it could be directly measured in the waste that it produces, right? So the more wasteful an economy, the more profitable that economy is. Well, if you go the permaculture route, there's very little waste, so that becomes a detriment to the economists, wouldn't you say?
Yes, but that doesn't give us. I agree that today the issue of hunger again is a political and financial issue. It's not a technical issue. I fully agree with you on that. But when we talk about what happens within 10, 20, 50 years, and say that we can overcome these political and financial issues of distribution, um, we're still going to hit at a certain point. I don't know if we're there, or even if we transition into regenerative systems all over the landmass of the Earth. Uh, we at a certain point we would maybe it would be at 9 billion, maybe it would be at 20 billion, but at some point we'll hit a hard limit on how much we can feed. And it's not very different from a bacteria in a jar of sugary water, or yeast. It's going to peak and then it's going to regulate itself. So I don't know exactly where that limit passes, but I'm sure there is a hard limit of what the planet can support under any circumstance, even the most green one.
How did you get into permaculture? What was your life path? How did you end up going this regenerative agricultural path?
Um, well, I think I was always very attracted to spending time in nature. Um, as a child, with my family, we used to do a lot of hiking trips and spend weekends at nature, as much as there is nature in Israel. uh, um, and when it was always more as a visitor, as an observer, not as a manner of interaction with, or like in, engaging with. um, but then when I was I think 19 or 20 years old, I went to California to go on a vision quest, and that was a very powerful experience for me, and
Could you
that's a
could
whole
you
different story.
could you
But
share?
I was invited after that to a conference called Pioneers. Maybe some of the people listening are familiar with it. It's a very, very nice, very good conference happening in California, in the Bay Area, every year. Uh, and there was a workshop there by Toby Hemingway that wrote Gaia's Garden. Very, very good permaculturist and very good book. And it was like 4 hour long workshop, and I loved it. It totally talked to me. I I loved everything that he presented. Everything that he said really strang a chord. And soon after, I had to go back to Israel. And as soon as I got back to Israel, I started digging and looking for. It wasn't as easy because internet wasn't very common, but I found two places where they were teaching permaculture courses, and I picked one and I went there. I took the permaculture course. I fell in love with it deeply, and I stayed in that farm for another 2 years, just applying myself to all kinds of projects, from building with mud and um, planting trees
Yeah,
and
building with
gardening.
mud.
And, yeah, and my teacher and the owner of the farm, the couple that own the farm, she's a veterinarian and he's an agronomist in his background, and they both became gang ho permaculturists. And it was so amazing for me because I didn't have this kind of interaction with nature, like making nature, planting trees, making things grow. And so that was just a huge breakthrough for me. And I realized that there is nothing else in life that I would rather do than dedicate myself to regenerative agriculture. And
And you
after
were
two
you
years
were
there,
you were 22, 23 at that point?
I was, yeah, about 22, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah.
After 2 years there, I wanted to get more professional about horticulture. I figured, my teacher Boer in that farm, he was extremely knowledgeable about tree planting because this was his background. But when it came to gardening vegetable, I felt always that it's kind of like winging it, and we had more failure than successes. Although we were anyway in extremely harsh conditions in the Israeli desert. But nevertheless, I wanted to know more, and I applied for a scholarship with John Givens in California with the bio intensive agriculture. And I went there. I got a scholarship, and I went there to study 6 month apprenticeship under John Givens, and that was a very important milestone in my life, both because of the amazing knowledge of his practice, and probably one of the most sustainable or beyond sustainable um, ways of feeding humans, especially if we come back to the delicate topic of feeding, a growing population. Um, but an even more important milestone for me was that I met this gorgeous Colombian girl,
Whoop
and
whoop.
I fell in love with. And today she is my wife and the mother of my 2 kids, and we're still in love. It's the day that we met in California um,
Beautiful.
in 2004. Um, so we got together, and that started a whole new cycle in my life, where she had to, when she finished her program there, she would go back to the Earth University to finish her studies of agronomy. And I actually didn't have anything specific to do with my life, so I figured out I better just like um,
Better
uh,
follow that girl.
follow that girl. So I started hitchhiking my way from North California, and I found myself, and that's a long story that some other time we'll get deeper into. But I hitchhiked with a single hitch all the way from San Francisco to her a dorm in the Earth University in Costa Rica. on
That's
a,
great.
a on a bus that was running on straight vegetable oil.
Was that Stevens?
Um,
Was that Stevens' bus?
that was Stephen's initiative, the Sustainable Solution Caravan. We were a crew of 10 freaks trying to spread the word of permaculture and sustainable living. We called it sustainable at the time, yes. Um, so we drove over 3,000 miles on straight used vegetable oil from restaurants and grease traps,
That's awesome.
and that was a huge success. We came out in every possible newspaper in Central America, from Mexico to Panama, and in many main TV stations, radio stations. Huge coverage until today. People in Costa Rica, when they ask me how did I get here, and I tell the story, they're like, "Oh, wow, I remember." It was on the paper.
Yes.
So we had good exposure, and some people started thinking in that direction. Luckily.
Yeah, I remember
And,
I met Steven in Austin, Texas, and
uh-huh.
his bus was there. Like, I'd already been living here in Costa Rica for about a year, and then
What year was that?
that was 2000. No, I met him in the beginning of 2008.
No, so that was later. That was when he was running a third caravan. It was the Copali bus.
Okay, yeah, because it was a big bus. So that's
It
that.
was a big black bus.
Yes, it was out in the very first
Yeah,
Whole Foods store, and it was in
right.
Austin, Texas, and
Okay,
it.
so that was his third caravan, because that didn't make it to Costa Rica. It was just running around all over US.
Okay,
Um, the first two caravan were going from the States to Costa Rica. Yeah,
yeah.
I was on the second one.
By the end of the trip, by the time you got to San Jose, did you smell like French fries?
Oh yeah, I smelled like, yeah, no, from day two I pretty much smelled like fried food. Um, it was very good because it really got me for life. Not interested in fried foods anymore. So
Yeah. No trans fats for
I'm
you, right?
cured, cured for life.
Well, that's why
Yeah.
you're so healthy. You look like it. Yeah, it was kind of funny because we got into all the biodiesel stuff, and initially when I was converting these old Mercedes, and I had a bunch of friends that were doing it. The first thing is when I would drive behind them, you would see just this like billowing black smoke. It was just terrible. And then the other thing was actually, getting the used oil from all these places. I mean, it was actually a little bit more challenging than a bunch of my friends thought it would be.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's an adventure.
Definitely.
It's definitely an adventure. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, I got to Costa Rica. I met with my girl. She was still in the university, fourth year, the hardest. So she didn't have much free time for me. So I went to Punta Mona, Stephen's farm on the Caribbean side, the permaculture farm. It's beautiful. Highly recommended for everyone to go check it out.
Yes.
And I stayed there on and off for the next 2 years. Um, Also learning now a whole new, biome, the tropics. It was all new to me. So just apprenticing with Stephen Brooks, and learning the tropics, and learning the plants, learning the techniques, and
Was the tropics a shock for you? Like when you came to such a humid environment relative to Israel, the Northern California, did it just like throw you back?
well, you know what? It wasn't so much because I was traveling through land, and it crawled on me little by little. As we were driving south, it was, first we approach the subtropical parts of Mexico, and then it became gradually more tropical. And so I got introduced little by little. I think if I would like drop in, get off a plane and drive directly to Punta Mona, maybe it would have been more of a shock.
So you're making the transition down here. Your future wife is in school. You're out there, dodging the big raindrops and the waves in Punta Mona, and you're learning permaculture jungle style. When did you
Yeah,
when
yeah.
did you when did you actually start to put this stuff to work?
It was 2006. Melina already finished her university and went back to Colombia. We broke. It was a sad chapter in my life. We broke, we split.
Oh,
Um, and I went to Israel for a few months, and she finished her university and went to Colombia. And then when I came back to Costa Rica, she was already gone. And I was teaching permaculture courses in Punta Mona, and missing her. And somehow we were able to make contact again. Again, this is internet was just like in its diapers. There was already MSN Messenger, but neither of us really had internet connection. I was in fucking Punta Mona. Sorry, beep that. Um,
it doesn't
and
matter. Go for it.
and Melina was even if you can even imagine that, she was way farther into the uh, nowhere. She was working in the Gaviotas, in Las Gaviotas Center for Regenerative
In
Agriculture in
Panama?
the Oriental Llanos in Colombia. It literally
Wow.
takes a trip. If you go by land, it you need like it's like a camel trophy situation, right?
Uh huh.
And it takes you 5 days to get from the last like human civilized world to Gaviotas, on where there is no road. You just like go.
What wasn't that? There's a book I read about the Gaviotas, I believe.
Yeah, that's
Where,
the place. That's exactly there. That's exactly that.
that was my first introduction to permaculture, other than reading Victor Schauberger. But like I read a book
Uh-huh.
when I first moved to Costa Rica called Gaviotas.
Yeah, that's where she was. So she would ride 2 hours on her bicycle to some place, some like biological research station or something that had like a satellite phone, and I would stand on the beach in front of Paddy's house in Punta Mona with a big banana phone Motorola that
Right.
had like some connection to like a Panama line over, the Chingnola or something,
That's
and
love,
I
man.
had to stand in this specific spot, holding the phone in a strange angle and not to move the millimeter, and then we could sort of hear each other. Anyway, it was amazing. And I went to meet with her in Colombia, and we worked in different projects with indigenous communities in the Llanos, and then we were offered a job to do the landscaping for this project that is called the La Aldea in La Estrella, Medellin. A project that I just recently visited, just like literally last week. I've been there,
Oh,
and
what did it look like?
it's
Did it just explode on you?
amazing. Oh, it's beautiful. It's been what 11 years since we worked on that project, and trees are fully grown, and it's really beautiful. Um, so that was the first project that I took on, um, and then we moved to Costa Rica because I had a job offer. It was very hard to make a living for us in Colombia at that time. We had a better job offer with Copali Communities, aka La Ecovia today,
Right.
and similar kind of project. It's just ecological condominium, aspiring to be a community, and I worked there for another 2 years doing and designing and implementing the permaculture a framework, ponds for water retention with aquaculture, planting the fruit trees, putting together the garden and fertility systems and erosion control and all of that. And what? Then 2008 came, and economy crashed, and everything got shut.
Right.
And I found myself without a job and without very good prospects, with a tiny little baby in our
I think that's
farm.
when we met, right? That's when you had come down to Fuente Verde, like 2009 or so, like right in that.
2008, 2009. No, well, before Fuente Verde, there was another episode. That was 2008, right? The
Yeah,
financial crisis. We moved to Pachamama
that's right.
community in the Nicoya Peninsula. Pachamama community has about, I think, if I'm not mistaken, like over 100 families that live there, and then at any given time there are probably around some 200 visitors. It's an extraordinary community, extraordinary place. It's a spiritual community that is oriented towards more or less Osho teachings,
Right.
carried by one of his students, Diohar. And at the time, the community there was interested but not very ready for permaculture principles. They were looking at it still in a very narrow understanding through as an agricultural practice, and the circumstances or the context of climate and soil and hydrology in Pachamama are extremely challenging, and it was very hard to get
Why
crops to
is
grow.
that? What is it in the Nicoya Peninsula? Because when I first was coming down here, I was looking at property in the Nicoya, and I ended up moving down to the southern zone just because up there in the Nicoya it was so hard to find properties that had enough water to do any type of agriculture.
That's one factor. Another one, even if you have water, soil is in many of these farms, and very definitely in Pachamama farm land, soil is extremely degraded by slash and burn and cattle ranging for many years before they purchased the property. And another factor is the climate, that is extremely hot and dry in the dry season, and then extremely hot, humid, and rainy in the rainy season. So in the dry season, it's very hard on the plants because of the drought, and in the rainy season, it's very hard because of fungal disease. So it's hard to grow either way. Um, it's possible, but you need to develop the right environmental context or infrastructure for that, right? Melina and I, Melina, my wife, and I were trying to push the idea of a whole system thinking and approaching it from a regenerative angle, and see how we can, before talking about growing tomatoes or lettuces, which are very challenging in these conditions, talk about how do we interact with how do we regenerate the hydraulic cycle, and bring humidity from the rainy season into the dry season, and retain water in the soil. How do we improve shade to create coolness in the dry season? How do we prevent erosion that was massive in this land? And we were listened to, but maybe not fully heard at the time. I think it took time for the community to, for these ideas to sip in. And I can't take all the credit for all the beautiful things that are happening now in Pachamama. There are definitely other very important players, but I think today Pachamama is extremely dedicated to figuring out exactly these kind of solutions. Few years ago, what was it, 2015, I, together with a friend, a colleague from that community that is also a permaculturist, we created two very, very big water retentions that literally inject probably 10,000 cubic meters of water, or potentially more, into the water table every year. And that already marks a significant raise in the flow of springs below the retentions. And actually, these days, I believe that they're making a natural swimming pool feeding off of these springs. So the system starts to show its benefits, and the fruit trees that we planted in 2009, they are starting to fruit. So little by little, the system is changing.
That's wonderful. What are the basics of what you're talking about with the water retention? Like when I think of correcting the hydrological cycle, I'm thinking of planting a certain type of tree that attracts water, then through the transpiration cycle pumps that up into the sky.
That's very important. But if you look at a primary forest or healthy forest, you as you said, you have foliage and multi layers of foliage, and in a rainforest, for example, up to, depends. In the cloud forest, it's even higher, but in the rainforest, about 10% of the precipitation, which in tropics is a huge amount, doesn't ever reach the ground. It just keeps, it falls on the leaves and drops down and on ferns, or on and gets trapped in bromeliads and heliconia, rolled leaves, and mosses, and the mulch and crevices in the tree trunks, and 10% never reaches the ground. It just keeps in the above ground vegetation.
That's wonderful.
And then the other 90%, it hits the ground on a thick layer of mulch and tangled roots, and so it can't run very far, and it would filter through that sponge texture of the soil. Now, remove the forest, turn the land into a plantation, a coffee plantation, for example, or a cattle farm, and you now have high impact of rain on the soil. You have high compaction by the weight of the animal, or otherwise, if it's just cornfield or conventional ag, you have the compaction by machinery, and then you have a broken hydrological cycle because the rain falls on the compacted, depleted ground, high in clay. It creates mostly runoff and less infiltration. So yes, if you replant the forest, you would slowly restore that, but that might take 80 years. And in these 80 years, you're still going to suffer from huge loss of topsoil, and you are also going to damage the coral reefs because everything is related. You have high runoff, you have a lot of turbidity in the water, a lot of carried sediments of clay particles and silt and sand, and these are going to reach out to the ocean, and when they suspend in the water, they kill the coral. So if we want to start repairing that, sometimes in a situation like that where we already see gully erosion and exposure of a creek bed from severe erosion, we choose to create a earth dam system to hold the water. This is why they're called retention ponds or retention tanks, and let the water infiltrate into the ground slowly. Because otherwise what you have is a pattern, it's a feast and famine, right? You have rain and then you have water, but few days of no rain and then everything is dry again because everything just flashed through the creek and down into the ocean with your topsoil. So one way that we prevent that is by installing swales or otherwise off-contour diversion canals that have very, very mild slope, and they make the water flow very slowly through the landscape, saturating the soil before they leave the system. Or maybe sometimes these canals can end up in a retention pond and increase even further the retention capacity. And it's working miracles. I mean, it literally revives dead springs, creates new springs sometimes that weren't even there before, because it's just the mechanics. You can't inject 10,000 cubic meters of water into a small water table and not have it come somewhere out slowly. So
right, how do you make that calculation? Like, is there a certain like linear meter where if I do say 1,000 linear meters of berming of swales, that equals this amount of water? Like, how do you know that figure?
This is all very very well studied and precise a calculation. Come to a permaculture course. I go through it from A to Z. It's kind of heavy to go into that now, but yes, definitely you can calculate this stuff.
Yeah. When I first came down here, I would get pretty upset with how much runoff was in the rivers. It was amazing. Like, the rivers here would essentially turn bright orange, the color of the red clay. And I had I just kept thinking to myself, how does anything live in this water when the turbidity is that high?
Yeah, it's a major issue.
Yeah,
and one of the not criteria, one of the indicators of a healthy watershed is that you look at the river during a rain event, and there are two things that you're going to see in a healthy watershed. You're not going to see much turbidity in the water. Second, you're going to see that the flow is going to increase slowly, and the peak of the flow is going to be after the peak of the rain. Okay. And
Okay.
if this is it can be measured more precisely and be put on a graph, and then you can really analyze what's going on in the watershed. But just like eyeballing it, if while the peak of the rain is hitting the peak of the flow, crashes through the creek, then you know that your watershed is not healthy. It doesn't have enough retention by vegetation or by pond or by soil.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You know, my introduction into permaculture was through Victor Schauberger, even though he didn't call it permaculture, and he was very big into the river health, and he talked about turbidity, and he talked about the temperature in the water and the gradient of flow relative to the temperature, and his explanation of the hydrological cycle to this day informs everything that I do on my farm. Yeah,
Fascinating.
Yeah, pretty amazing. So here you're building thousands of meters of berms to increase the water retention of the land, and now you're back up. You're moving to the other side of Costa Rica on the southern slope of Chiripo at the Rise project. How many berms are you putting in there? How many linear feet of or linear meters of water retention are you up to over there?
Well, here not as much, because here we're in the humid tropics, actually just below the cloud line of the cloud forest, and we don't have a lack of water issue like we do in the Nicoya Peninsula. We actually more often have access of water. So here you wouldn't find any swales. You would find off-contour diversion canals, and I did put some ponds so far, and I would probably end up putting some more, but more for a stacked function, like we were talking about stacking functions, to prevent erosion, because there is so much water. Like right now, it's raining really hard. To prevent erosion and to improve retention capacity and to reduce runoff and turbidity, and also we use it for aquaculture. We actually right now are in the process of seeding our ponds with clams, freshwater clams that are amazing because they filter through and clean up the water, and we are going to introduce several prawns that are freshwater prawns that are native. They used to be prolific in the rivers here, and because of many years of Costa Ricans love to go at night and pull out the little freshwater prawns, and they were overfished at a certain period in the history. Actually, it was most common to fish them by poisoning the river, and they would just bob to the surface.
I remember that. Yeah.
So we're introducing them back into the system, and little by little, we're hoping to develop an aquaculture system that is regenerative to the creeks and waterways.
Are you familiar with aquaponics?
Yes.
That I took a course of that. There was a gentleman that came through here, and I guess it was like 6 or 7 years ago. There was a fish.
Max Meyer?
I believe so. Yeah, I helped him build an. Yes. Yeah.
I know Max.
I helped him build an above-ground pond down in San Salvador, and I just love the whole system of having, like you said, the freshwater clams and prawns, and then having the two different types of fish in the pond also at the same time.
Right.
And I always thought it would be really cool to put like a star dome over an above-ground pond, a really small one, and then you just have your different plants dropping down and being fed by the nitrogen-rich water. I love the
Yeah.
idea. The ponds that
Yeah,
you're
I
doing.
think aquaponics is a great system, especially for urban situations where you don't have much land available, or for arid locations where water is very limited, because you can have it in a greenhouse in a very controlled environment and grow, broaden the spectrum of things that you can grow with a very high water efficiency. It's counterintuitive because you would think that you need a lot of water for a system like that, but because it's a closed system, you keep recycling the same water, and if you're in a greenhouse, you pretty much can account for very high uh, rate of restoring lost water by evaporation. So it is a very good system. I don't focus much on aquaponics here in this project because we have so much land that it would be a big investment for no good reason.
Right, right. I'm just thinking for myself on my farm, just because I'm pretty much the only person here that's doing any yard work. That I want more of like the urban permaculture systems, just because that's much easier to manage. Once you start spreading yourself too thin, almost nothing gets done.
Well, that's true, but my experience with aquaponic systems is that they are high management systems.
Well, good.
I
We're gonna.
didn't see yet an aquaponic system that actually works that is of low maintenance.
Well, we'll talk offline on. I want the lowest. I want the highest yield with the lowest amount of energy input.
Plant katuk and cranberry hibiscus.
I already have that. I'm doing good. I'm saying with an aquaculture system.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I definitely want clams and prawns, and I want fish. I want that type of protein on my property.
Yeah.
Yeah. When it comes to permaculture design, in your designs, do you implement any type of animal work involved? Like, do you have
Yeah,
cow?
definitely. I consider animals to be an important part of our system for many reasons. One is that they're very important translators. They translate energy that comes in forms that we cannot consume or don't want or choose not to consume into higher quality energy or food. Um, Quality in terms of what we like to eat, right? For example, I like to team with insects because insects are very. I find them to be very interesting. We put a lot of energy into our setting up our black soldier fly larva production here as a prime product to feed chickens and fish. So I mentioned before that we have our fish ponds, and we are putting a lot of intention into moving into a completely grain and GMO, mostly not necessarily grain because we do grow grain here, but completely soy and corn free diet for all our animals. So a crucial part of that is the black soldier fly larva. So that is one part of it, and then the chickens can translate. So the larva translates our waste from the kitchen into high protein and fat food for other animals. Although in Asia they do eat them and they report it to be delicious, but I still didn't have the guts to try.
You wuss.
Yeah. Well, I think when I have fly larvae that are fried in butter, and we'll call it butterflies. Maybe I'll
That's
try.
perfect.
But
Butter makes everything better, right?
right, and butterflies, right?
So let
Um,
me ask. Can I ask you a specific about this? Is the
okay,
black
yeah,
is the black soldier fly what would normally make larvae in my compost, or do you
yes.
specifically seed? Okay.
Yes, I, all I do is to create a habitat for them that is going to be ideal for the females to lay their eggs in to attract them, because they're native to here. You don't need to introduce any weird animal. I wouldn't do that. They're native to Costa Rica and to most of the world, and you only need to provide them with habitat and food, and then we work with different prototypes to cause them to self-harvest. They have this um, instinct of climbing when they're ready to pupate. Makes
Hmm.
sense, right? Because they live in the
Right.
in the compost pile basically, and then they need to pupate. Then they need to hatch with wings. So their instinct tells them, I need to go out of this shit because when I spread my wings, I need to be able to fly and not be stuck in shit. Um, so they climb. And that takes them about 2 weeks, and then they climb. And if you have the right design of their farm or their box, then they would climb and fall directly into a little collection bucket, and then you can feed that to your fish or chickens. Or you can have them fall directly to your chicken pasture, and the chickens would figure it out very, very quickly, or directly to your pond, whichever way.
I was about
Uh,
to say, yeah, the chickens would be jumping into your
oh
compost
yeah,
pretty
the
quickly.
chickens are going crazy for the grubs for sure. They know what's good for them. And then, so fish and chicken can translate then these grubs into even higher quality protein from my perspective, because I love eating farm raised eggs and fish. So yeah, animals are important in the system, and we also work with cows here on a rotative agro-silvopastoral system, and
Is that the same thing as polyphase farming? Is that like where you're
yes, it's the
always
same concept. We are still evolving. We have a very, very small operation with that. Uh, Really, it's for us to explore at that level, because we have a lot of land and very, very few animals, and we couldn't even like when we talked with the polyface experts, or not, we didn't talk directly with them, but with their peers. They laughed at us. Oh, you don't need to do that. You have so little animals for so much land. Don't worry about it. You won't be overgrazing. But we do want to get it dialed, so we are working towards that as much as possible. Um, and then in the past, I liked very much working with pigs to as a compost machine and to turn soil. So you can introduce with an electric fence to a unit of land. You can introduce pigs, for example, for where you have cow grass, Bracharia brisanta, for example, and if you put enough pigs in relatively small, not tiny, but for example, an acre with 4 pigs would be cleaned to the ground and then turned over within a month. You can obviously make that space even smaller or increase the amount of pigs and have it faster. And then you can move on to
wow.
make garden beds or plant trees or whatever.
I need that
So
for I have king grass. Is king grass would the pigs eat my king grass?
they wouldn't necessarily eat your king grass, but they would till the soil. They're interested more in the soil biome and the grubs in the soil. So they would just turn it over. Maybe before you put the pigs, either send a guy with a machete to chop it, or send in a group of goats. The goats would eat it. They would munch it to the ground, and then you can put the pigs in.
So
And
what
then
I know of,
if you want to go even more thorough after the pigs or with the pigs, you put the chickens in. they finish to eat like all the weed seeds in the ground and all the grubs in the ground, and fertilize very thoroughly because their fertilizer is of much higher quality, nitrogen phosphorus wise, than the pigs. And then you have a dung soil to make your garden bed.
Yeah, so that's the system that I've been told is first you bring the cows in, then you bring the sheep in, or goats, whatever you have, then you bring the pigs in, and then the chickens.
Yes.
And if you do that, you're going to have the healthiest soil possible with animals.
Yes. I agree with that.
Wow, that's amazing.
Permitting that it's well managed.
Right, you really have to stay on top of the rotation of it, correct? Like you have to make sure the timing is just right.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, so you and Melina, you guys, you're on site, you're doing your work. What is your own personal space? Do you have a farm?
Well, I have I have a house on a lot in the Ecovia, and I have my playground here at Rise. At the moment, I don't have anything else. And I have my many other projects that I ran before that I always go back to and check on and give advice and harvest fruit.
That's something I remember how proud you were when you took me to your place just outside of Hako. I was really excited to share that with you because I could tell you were a proud papa coming back to see how everything had grown into place.
Yeah.
Do you have a long-term vision of having your own farm for your own family, or do you feel content with just kind of doing these projects I think both, but so far I've been really enjoying working on projects that are raising in scale, and it allows me a much broader canvas to work with than I could afford with my own funds. So my ultimate goal is to restore as many hectares as I can and to have a beneficial impact on as many humans as I can. So if I would have, with my limited funds, start a project like that, maybe through visits and education, I could have a good impact. But so far from what my estimation, I had much more impact of demonstration, education, and restoring land, working on other projects. So there will be a time when I will also have my own farm, but it is likely that I would run very bored very soon because I could probably only afford it, half a hectare or so. Yeah, I hear you, and it's an expensive proposition to get started. It definitely is, especially with as high a quality as you'd want to do things.
Yeah.
Well, you have a very noble goal to restore as many hectares as possible and touch as many humans as possible positively. That's something very noble, Itai. I really want to thank you for your time to come on the podcast. Is there any place where people can go online to see your work?
You can go on the risecostarica.com website to see the project that I'm working on now, although the website still don't have much updated footage from the ongoing projects here, but you can get a sense of where this project is going towards. Other than that, Symbiosis Eco Design is a website of the consultancy company that Melina and I have, or we don't really do other projects right now because our hands are full with Rise, but there are some pictures there. And I guess you can look on my Facebook page. I don't ever post anything there, but other people do, so.
That's great. That's awesome. Well, I will definitely put those links in the show notes, Etai. Thank you again for your time, and let's catch up soon. I need to come out to Rise. Deegan keeps telling me about
Yeah,
it,
please do.
and so does Brendan McKeon. They're both like, you got to come out and check it out. So I definitely
All
need to do
right.
that soon.
Awesome.
All right, family. Thank you for tuning in once again this week. It was a very great podcast with Etai. As you can see, he's a very exacting person, and I wish I could show you some of his work, but you're just going to have to make your way down to Costa Rica here and see the beauty that he has planted. If you ever get a chance to plant something, especially plant a tree, do it. It'll be a legacy that everybody in the future will get to enjoy. These upcoming weeks are going to be quite exciting. We're going to take a little turn towards the magical realm. I have a couple of pretty prolific magicians that are going to be coming online. One is Gordon White of Rune Soup, runesoup.com, and the YouTube channel Rune Soup. We're going to get into the philosophy of magic, and I'm going to hold out to describe why we're going to be going into that, because I think you'll find it pretty interesting. We're going to have Tracy Twyman back on the show also. Tracy is her latest book, Genuflect, is amazing. I'm on chapter 10, and I'm riveted, to say the least. But I love her way of conveying truths in a quote-unquote fictional storyline. I think it's a wonderful way of purveying truth, and I think people in the past used to do this to escape, I guess you would say, the authorities' ire. And so she's going to be back on. I'm looking forward to catching up with her. In the next couple weeks, I think I'm going to go ahead and interview Kevin O'Neill on his shamanistic role with the plant medicines and his latest journeys down in Colombia. And I'm going to have a special guest coming in September. So you guys stay tuned. If you like what you're hearing here, please support us by sharing on all the Facebooks and Instagrams and all that good stuff. I'm upping my media game now, so all the help is greatly appreciated. I'll be posting my my little cryptocurrency. I don't even know what they're called. They're like a little symbol that you can donate to. Got into that in 2014, and it's doing really well. That's a technology that we're definitely we have some people in the queue to interview about, and yeah. Thank you for your contributions. Any comments? If you guys have anybody in particular that you'd like me to interview, please let me know. I love to hear from you. Thank you again for listening, and we will see you again next time.